Who do you trust in Houston for the Texans next year? What is going on in the Never-Too-Early best ball tournaments with ADP that you need to exploit to win a $40,000 grand prize? And what is going to be the result of Super Bowl 59 less than 48 hours away? We have a great show for you tonight. 5-time FFPC League winner Scott Thomas will co-host with me. This is going to be a banner show. Everything you need to know about the Super Bowl, everything you need to know about the Never-Too-Early best ball tournament, and more. I'm Eric Balkman. We got Scott Thomas here. It's going to be a great show for you. Stick around. Your high-stakes fantasy football hour starts right now.
Can't stand the pressure. I've seen greater. Need a lesson.
Broadcast live and heard around the world, you are now watching the most entertaining hour of radio on the planet. Welcome to the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com with your hosts Eric Balkman and jferrellelliott. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour is your home for analysis from the best players in the world. And now, because no one else was available, here are Eric Balkman and jferrellelliott.
Solace in the scripture. Are we not all our father's sons? I became a man. Nobody ever told me what a man was.
Welcome in and thank you. Greetings, salutations to all the Balkaholics and Ferrelliacs tuning in for the latest episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by the Fantasy Football Players Championship at myffpc.com. I want to welcome in everybody to a special Super Bowl edition of the show. Like I said in the open, we are less than 48 hours away from probably, quite frankly, who the champion is going to be. We will know 48 hours from now, whether it's the Chiefs or the Eagles. But listen, you're not tuning into the show tonight for analysis on that, although we're going to give you some. You are tuning in to find out what you need to be doing in the Never-Too-Early best ball tournament and much more. I am Eric Balkman. You know me from the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the Better Sports Network's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, and of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. I am slightly above average at hosting. My normal co-host, jferrellelliott, the definitive commissioner of fantasy football, is getting ready for the big Super Sunday weekend at Caesars Southern Indiana for the KFFSC, as it is the unofficial, quite frankly, the official launch of all the KFFSC drafts this weekend. I'll be drafting in the $1,000 big payback draft at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Sunday remotely because I couldn't make it there this year. But there are a ton of people who did make it there who will be drafting live all day tomorrow. And of course, Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon before the big game on Sunday. If you want to play in the KFFSC this year, check it out at kffsc.com. If you are looking for more action in the FFPC, I don't know if we've ever had this many options available for you here on February 7th of any other day. Of any other year of the FFPC. Right now, the Never-Too-Early best ball tournaments are going on right now. You can play for a $40,000 grand prize with a $125 entry fee in the Never-Too-Early tournament, or you can enter for $35 in the Superflex version of the FFPC Never-Too-Early tournament and win a $10,000 grand prize. Tournaments drafts are already off and running. They're going to be having their drafts conclude on April 24th, which is the first day of the NFL draft. They are available right now. Drafts are with a 30-second, 60-second, 2-hour, and 6-hour clock at myffpc.com. While you're at myffpc.com, why not pick up a Dynasty Orphan? Plenty of them are available. Entry fees ranging normally from $77 all the way up to $5,000, but a lot of those entry fees have been lowered for 2025. You're going to notice significant discounts on those. Bear in mind that in 1,800 plus leagues in over 15 years, the FFPC has never, ever had a Dynasty League fold. So once you join an FFPC Dynasty League, you know you are good to go going forward. Dynasty Leagues and Empire Leagues available for orphans right now. You can pick those up at myffpc.com. And of course, this past Sunday, we launched the FFPC Big Gorilla Tournament. It is the new version of the Fantasy Pros Championship, still $1 million grand prize, still a $350 entry fee, still a $50 discount on every third team that you buy. Drafts already running now. The early rampage, which is something that we're very proud of this year. It's basically a tournament within a tournament. If you are one of the first 200 leagues before June 14th, you will be entered not only into the Big Gorilla Tournament for $1 million grand prize, you're going to be entered into the early rampage tournament for a $10,000 grand prize as well. The 7 Bananas promo is also live. If you get the 7 pick at least 2 times in a row, all the way up to 5 times in a row, you will get anywhere from a free FFPC team all the way up to a free jungle safari for 4. Yeah, we're paying for that for you if you get the 7 pick 5 times in a row. Not likely, but it has happened before. So check that out at myffpc.com. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be again this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. More to come on that. So I will welcome you into the show. James Hicks wants to know if Oinker's here. Oinker is here. He's excited to talk fantasy football tonight as well. And no Farrell Elliott, as I said, he is off this week, but want to welcome in a very special guest for a couple of reasons. Number one, he has already nearly a half dozen league championships to his name in the FFPC. He has been a hardcore player of the Never-Too-Early tournaments, not only this year, but in previous years as well. And his son, who won the Superflex Never-Too-Early Best Ball Tournament, was our guest last week. We're going to keep it in the family this week. Brad Thomas, our guest last week. This week's special guest co-host. Please welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Scott Thomas. Scott, good evening. Welcome. How are you doing, dude?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
It's fun. Now, what hat are you wearing tonight? What is that? That's
Bengals.
the Bengals. Okay, so are you a Bengals guy? I didn't realize this.
I'm a Bengals guy. I was spent most of my life as a Cowboy fan. About 5 years ago, when the Bengals drafted Burrow, I had enough of the front office in Dallas. I couldn't take their decisions anymore, and I transitioned over to the Bengals and big Joe Burrow fan.
The Bengals. Do I have this? I'm just going through my show rundown here. Do I have any Bengals on here? I do. We're gonna get to the Bengals. I'm glad I have a Bengals fan on to talk to you about Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, and so much more of everything going on in Cincinnati tonight. We will get to that. We have so much more to get to as far as the Arizona running back situation. We'll talk about the Bucs offense without Liam Cohen. But I want to kick things off with the listeners and the viewers getting to know you a little bit better, Scott, as long as we're kicking things off. When you're not winning these FFPC leagues, what are you doing for a living?
Well, for over 30 years, I was worked for a conveyor and automation company, and I was an application engineer, did concept layouts for production facilities, along with proposals that outline scope and pricing. Last year, my wife and I sat down and talked a bit and decided I would retire in May. And so I retired in May of last year so that we could move down closer to family and spend more time with my son and granddaughter. And we did that. And so, yeah, I have more time for fantasy football now.
Which is always a good thing, right? Well, congratulations on the retirement. And obviously, I think and we've had retired guests on before, and that's one of the biggest things that they allude to is like, well, I can grind waivers more, I can draft more, and certainly it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing. Is fantasy football has become a bigger part of your life since May of 2024, right, Scott?
Yeah, I would say so.
Fantastic stuff. Let's get into it. I always love having you guys on this time of year because the people who are drafting while the previous NFL season is still going on, these are the people that really have a passion for the sport. You've been drafting in the Never-Too-Early tournament, not only this year, but prior to this year as well. What is it about this Never-Too-Early tournament that has you coming back? What makes it so fun for you?
I mean, I could talk an hour on this one question. For whatever reason, the Never-Too-Early Best Ball Tournament, I have great success with that. A lot better than the other tournaments that I've tried. A lot better than some of the other leagues. Last year, I had a 72% advance rate.
Wow!
Nice. In the early best ball, compared to like 18% in the late best ball. It was that way 2 years ago as well. I'm not sure why, but I think there's a couple factors with it. I mean, obviously with the early best ball, when you're looking at that, there's a lot of unknowns. You have not had any free agency. You have not had any NFL draft. There's so many things that can change in a heartbeat. Where when you get into May and June, things are a little more settled and everybody kind of has a guide map. You know, they all know the same thing. The information is out there. Everybody's got the same information. The ADP kind of gets locked in. and you can almost tell who's going next in the draft. It's not that way in January, February, and March. It's all over the place, and it's anybody's guess. And I was fortunate enough, like last year, to project a lot of different things correctly. I loaded up on Buck Bowers in the 6th round. It worked out great for me. I loaded up on
Hold on, Scott. I want to stop you right there because this is good stuff. I want to take this piece by piece. Let's start with Brock Bowers. You loaded up on him. What was it that tipped the scales for you to not only say, hey, I want to make sure I get a few shares of Brock Bowers, but you wanted to get a lot of shares of Bowers? What was it last year that sort of turned you on to him?
I watched him all through Georgia, and I thought he was an incredible tight end. I liked Mark Andrews coming out of Oklahoma years ago, and there was something about the way Mark Andrews played the game. And Brock Bowers reminded me of Andrews. Receiver skills were off the charts, almost like he wasn't a tight end, like he was a receiver. Right. And so I was very impressed with him. I was scared to take tight ends too early, 1st and 2nd round. A lot of times it doesn't pan out. And he was sitting there going like late 5th, early 6th, whatever. And so it was the perfect spot. It seemed like I was either taking Kittle or I was taking Bowers in almost every draft. Fortunately, I got a lot of Bowers, and he far exceeded my expectations.
So that was the, and totally makes sense with Bowers, because I'm trying to think about how we can exploit this for the 2025 season as well. What else did you hit on besides Bowers last year in this Never-Too-Early tournament?
Ladd McConkey, another Georgia player. I was taking him in round 15 early in the drafts. And I was taking him at one point. I had 100% ownership. It was like I was grabbing him in every draft. And when I looked at the analysis on the receivers, a lot of people had him at like receiver 10 or 11. I had him at 5. So there was a huge discrepancy on Ladd McConkey for me and where he was getting drafted. Bucky Irvin was the other one. Again, round 15, round 16, I was scooping up Bucky Irving. So it was a really good year as far as it's kind of like you're looking for fantasy gold there with the rookies, taking them late. And I think taking them late is a key element of that. You're looking for guys that are kind of being ignored on the drafts that can excel. I was kind of terrified about Bucky Irving when he ran his 40 time in the combine, because I thought, well, I just wasted all those picks. And then I backed off of him in the late best ball, which I probably shouldn't have done. Okay. But I backed off of him because of that time. But by that time, I had 50% ownership in early best ball of Bucky Irving. So it did pay out last year with the rookies. And so I think one of the things that happens too in early best ball that helps some players and hurts others is sometimes the rookie fever takes over. Okay. And rookie fever it's a real thing. You're preparing for the drafts. The NFL draft is coming up. Free agency is coming up. And you see all these names up there. And all of a sudden they're going 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. Okay. And I've seen guys take 3-4 rookies in a row in drafts. And the only thing I'll say about that is most of these guys are not going to hit in September and October. They might hit in November. They might hit in December. But you know what happens if you have 4 or 5 guys that don't do anything for you in September and October? You're out. You're done.
Yep.
I mean, the race is over. And I saw that last year with a lot of guys that loaded up on rookies. They're sitting at 9th or 10th, late October, and they're not catching the other guys that are 150, 200 points ahead of them. So it's rookies can be great. They're fun to draft. They're fun to watch in the NFL draft to see where they go. but they can also undermine your entire team. So you have to use a balance where you take maybe a couple here or there, and don't take them all like in the first 8 rounds. I mean, be careful, because if you take them in the first 8 rounds, you need to be right.
You had mentioned after Bowers, the second player you mentioned was Ladd McConkey, both Georgia guys. Do you follow Georgia or the SEC in college football? I guess with the Never-Too-Early players, I think kind of watching or being abreast of college football is going to give you an advantage because you kind of know the rookies coming in. But the first 2 guys you mentioned are Georgia. Can you talk a little bit about why? Was it just coincidence that both of these are Bulldogs? Both of them are in the SEC. Do you follow that conference more than others?
No, not really. I watch some college football. I try to watch it when I can. And obviously, you go to the big games that are going on. I just seem to watch a lot of Georgia that year. And I saw a lot of games. And what I saw in Ladd McConkey was Julian Edelman. I saw a guy that was quick. He ran sharp routes. He knew how to get open. And he had good hands. Now, he did have some injury issues in college, where here and there he missed time, and that was a concern. But I saw a guy like Edelman that can be consistently good in the NFL. And, I mean, Ladd McConkey just blew up last year. I mean, he got to I thought that would be a 2-year process to get to where he was last year, but he took off. And then he landed in a spot that really didn't have any receivers, which and a good quarterback, right? I mean, he couldn't get it any better. So I think it worked out. There was the fear that Harbaugh would run the ball into the ground, and he wouldn't pass it at all, but obviously that didn't happen. I was very happy. It was amazing that all those guys hit like that. And there was one other guy that was my most owned player in early best ball, Tucker Kraft. And I took him like in the 19th or 20th round. And Tucker Kraft turned out to be pretty good, actually. But I really liked him. So I know some of these guys were talking about then and all that. But, yeah, these were guys that I was after last year. May not own as much this year. They're much more expensive.
Right. That's true. That is very true. There is so much to unpack here. I definitely want to get back to the Tucker Kraft conversation. I want to go out to the YouTube chat right now. Michael Kinzel has a question for you here, Scott. Do you think Bowers will have a sophomore slump? Now, sophomore slump is an interesting way of putting it. I call it maybe perhaps regression to the mean, because we have no precedent of what Bowers did as a rookie, as a tight end last year. We've never seen it done before. Quite frankly, we haven't really seen a receiver do that in his rookie year before. So when we talk about a sophomore slump, Bowers could still return value as the top tight end. He could still return value as a first-round pick and still slump this year, right? So what do you project as far as what you're seeing from him next year? We'll talk about the Raiders in a little bit. New head coach, new offensive coordinator, probably a new quarterback this year. How are you looking at Bowers this year as compared to last year? Is he too pricey for you? Are you looking for a better value at tight end? Because Bowers, you have to pay the iron price right now. He is super expensive.
Yeah, he was a little more expensive than what I anticipated. I expected the 1-2 turn. And, I mean, I'm seeing him go with the second pick, the third pick, in almost every draft. So he is pricier than what I expected. I think it's risky taking him there a little bit. It depends what the Raiders do, okay? I mean, I would expect them to bring in a receiver, whether it be by free agency. There's not a lot out there in free agency. And to me, the rookie class of receivers is not that great this year. So I don't know where they're going to get that receiver that they bring in. But if say they just signed a T. Higgins, yes, that would drastically impact Bowers. Okay. The other thing is if they drafted like an Ashton Genty, I've heard rumors of him going all over the place, but let's just say they brought him in, the running game would become a much larger focus of the Raiders offense. So, but I think Bowers is going to be solid next year. I mean, I don't think he may drop off some, but I don't think it would be like a Laporta drop off. I don't think it would be that substantial.
Would you be willing to take him as a top 3 or 4 pick in the Never-Too-Early tournament right now, or is that too rich for you?
I could take a small percentage of them.
Okay.
I don't think I would load up on them, but I would like to have a couple teams with them on.
Let me ask you this regarding Brock Bowers. Michael Kunzel also posted on YouTube. This year, the Warren kid, Tyler Warren from Penn State, looks like this year's Bowers. Now, on the surface, I would say yes, but a few things to point out here. Number one, Brock Bowers literally, the word or the term generational talent gets thrown around way too much. He literally is a generational talent. Tyler Warren, I'm not convinced of that. Number one, he's older than what Brock Bowers was. And I say number one. I think that is the biggest concern I have about Warren, because I've seen him do this for years at Penn State. And the last couple of years, I'm kind of wondering, okay, is he doing this because he's going up against 18 and 19-year-old defenders and he's just, being a man amongst boys? I don't know. That's my concern with Tyler Warren coming in. However, can't deny what he's been able to do at the collegiate level. I am semi-excited to see what Tyler Warren does. How do you feel about his rookie season? Obviously not knowing landing spot yet, Scott.
Yeah, I think with Warren, we got a little spoiled in the last 2 years because we were always trained at tight ends. You don't draft them as rookies. They take a couple years to develop in the NFL. Don't draft rookie tight ends. And then Laporta comes along, and then Bowers comes along. And so I think right now the tendency is to try to find that next guy in line that's going to blow up. I'm under the opinion right now is that I wouldn't feel comfortable with him as my starting tight end, okay, on a fantasy team. So if I could get him as my second tight end, I would absolutely do it.
Yeah.
Okay, but I don't feel quite comfortable with him as my starter, and he's being drafted as a starter. So I would say that I'm probably fading him.
Tyler Warren, I'm looking up the Never-Too-Early Best Ball tourney ADP right now. Shout out to Fantasy Mojo, fantasymojo.com. If you are playing in the FFPC, highly recommend you get a subscription to Fantasy Mojo. It is infinitely helpful. Darren Armani, the guy who's in charge of that, also is the godfather of the Pros vs. Joes Challenge that we broadcast live here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour every late July, early August. Tyler Warren, 2-year point, Scott, tight end 12 right now at the 806. This is not dynasty. This is redraft where he's going as tight end 12. He's going ahead of the likes of Dalton Kincaid, Tucker Kraft, and Dallas Goedert, going right behind not Dawson Knox. He's going right behind Travis Kelce and Evan Ingram right now. Let's get back to the Ladd McConkey conversation. You were talking about how you were so heavy on him last year, and I think a big part of why you were so heavy on him was because nobody else was drafting him. Like, you look at, I'm going to fast forward to the end of drafting season. In the FFPC main event last year, right before the NFL season started, Ladd McConkey, on average, was going at the 8'11", wide receiver 46. Now, you actually got him cheaper in the Never-Too-Early tournament than that. But to prove my point, he still was going low and in early September. Now, fast forward a year, in the Never-Too-Early tournament, you are looking at McConkey right now as wide receiver. I just had it. I'm sorry. Wide receiver 11 at the 301. How comfortable are you taking a player like him who, and I'll just kind of give you my own personal thoughts here when I ask you this. I'm a little nervous that recency bias is playing in the heads of FFPC players, knowing how strongly he finished the season. And that's fresh in our minds. But at the same time, understanding Jim Harbaugh still wants to run the football. He's still going to put a focus on the offensive line. And I wonder if McConkey, if we're drafting him more at his ceiling right now, which usually does not prove very fruitful in these Never-Too-Early tournaments. Scott, I'll throw it to you. Your thoughts on Ladd McConkey at that 2-3 turn.
I understand it, but I don't like it. I do feel he's being drafted at his ceiling. Okay, top 12 wide receiver. He's not an alpha receiver. Okay, not somebody that I would put in that neighbor's mold. Okay, and so I get a little bit nervous because let's just say the Chargers brought back Keenan Allen, okay, for example, as a free agent. All right. that would have a significant impact on McConkey. There's so many moves that could have a significant impact. Their offensive skill players were not good last year. I mean, it was Herbert to McConkey all day long, right? And I feel like there's a regression in place. Okay, so the 2-3 turn is rich. I did think, though, before the drafts began, that he would be like a mid-third rounder. Okay, so it's not way earlier, but I've seen him going 9th pick of the second round. And to me, that's just too early. I'd probably never taken him in the second round. And I like him. I like him a lot, okay? But again, if you project out what's more than likely going to happen this year, okay, I think most of it bodes for somewhat of a regression for McConkey.
Lad McConkey right now is going just behind Drake London, but he is going ahead of Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, and T. Higgins right now. I am with you. I'm probably staying away at that price. I'm a little bit nervous that we get in through September and we're kind of wondering, well, where are these stats for McConkey, that we're used to seeing at the end of that last season? And I don't know if we're going to see him at least in the early part of next season. Bucky Irving, I want to touch on him real quick because you mentioned him earlier. You drafted him a bunch in the Never-Too-Early tournament. Then you see his 40, knowing he's not a big guy. So you'd imagine he would run really well at the combine. That didn't happen. And you weren't alone. There was a lot of people fading him after that. And yet, what did we see here in this season? The last half, maybe the last 2/3 of the season, he really took control of the backfield. And again, because of perhaps recency bias, definitely playing a role into it, he is going very high in drafts this year. In fact, in the Never-Too-Early tournament for the FFPC, running back 10 at the 209, just behind Genty, Jacobs, and Breece Hall. He's going ahead of Jonathan Taylor and Kyron Williams. When you look at how good Irving was last year, are you still working to get him in the mid to late second round? Or again, are we looking at maybe a guy that's going a little bit too high for what his performance is going to be in 25?
Yeah, again, just like with Ladd, I think he's going a little bit too early. I have him as my 13th running back, and I'm looking at third round for Bucky Irving, but I see him consistently go mid-second. The trio of running backs there is my biggest concern, and the fact that Liam Cohen is gone also bothers me a little bit. I think they'll be okay because they promoted from within. And so I think even with Liam Cohen gone, most of it will stay in there. But, he was a brilliant coach, and there's always some kind of fallback from that. And then you look at the three running backs they got, Rachaad White, and then you got Sean Tucker, okay? The funny thing is, 2 years ago, I think it was 2023 drafts, Sean Tucker was my highest drafted rookie running back. That didn't work out so well. But I really liked him coming out of Syracuse. And when I watched, he had medical conditions and he wasn't in the combine, and it was a real mess. When I watched him last year with Tampa, he looked good. I mean, he looked really good. And right now, the only thing separating Sean Tucker from big impact is opportunity. That's it. I mean, he's behind two other backs technically right now, but they were trying to get him in the game. And Rachaad White was very involved in the passing game, okay? He wasn't running the ball much or as well, but he really was involved in the passing game. And so I don't know if that totally goes away. I think I still see a bit of a three-headed monster here. And because of that, I feel like taking Bucky Irving before mid-third is probably too quick.
He's an easy fade at that point, right? I mean, if you are of the belief, and I don't necessarily think you're wrong, that if Rachaad White and Sean Tucker are going to be playing into this backfield, why would you take Irving over a guy who controls the entire backfield in Indianapolis like Jonathan Taylor, or a guy in Los Angeles who controls the entire backfield in Kyron Williams? Quite frankly, you could make the same case for James Cook and potentially Chase Brown. All those players are going behind Irving, and at that point, Scott, I'm with you. There's no reason to be drafting a guy. If you believe that's the way the backfield shakes out, there's no reason for you to be taking him over those other guys this year. Now, while we go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Bucky Irving's not he's sort of a slight built guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He's not a big running back or anything like that. He's very elusive. And it was the reason I drafted him a lot last year. Is I saw his tackles broken percentage was incredible. And I guess that's something I learned too, is that they don't have to run a fast 40 time in the combine, because Kyron Williams didn't do it either.
Right.
And he was a smaller guy that had a great tackle break percentage. So some of these things are different, but when you watch Bucky on Oregon game film, he was incredible. I mean, he had that burst, that speed, that cutting ability, and he showed it last year. I like him. There's a chance that they could feature him and just say, you know what, the other two guys are pure backups. I just don't think they will. Okay. I think they're going to try to preserve Bucky's health and his speed and energy by not wearing him down. And I think you're still going to see a mix of Rashad White and Sean Tucker. And for that reason, I think second round's too high.
You know, while we've been talking about Bucky Irving and Ladd McConkey, there's been an interesting conversation going on in the YouTube chat right now about Tucker Kraft. Michael Kinzel posting that took Colby Parkinson, not Tucker Kraft, in the 19th round, and that was a loss. And then we got Tank the Chai guy. That's why I went Kraft over Musgrave last year. Kraft was a last-round pick, and now Musgrave is in the last round this year. And that brings me to my point here. Tucker Kraft is going, again, a player that if you hit on last year and you want to get him this year, you have to pay a more expensive price. Right now, Tucker Kraft is the 13th tight end off the board, right behind Tyler Warren. He's going at that 8-9 turn. How likely are you to still be investing in Kraft again this year at that price, Scott?
I absolutely will. I have him as my 11th tight end. Okay, so unlike the other guys we were just talking about, I think Kraft is actually being a little bit undervalued. He's one of my breakout candidates this year. I feel like he's on the verge of being very good, and I'm not that thrilled with a lot of the tight ends that are above him. They all have like red flags. So, yeah, I like Tucker Kraft a lot. My biggest concern there is Green Bay went to a run-oriented offense last year with Jacobs. They ran the ball heavy. I'm not Nostradamus or anything like that, but I just have a feeling that's not going to happen this year. Okay, I think it's going to be a little more pass-friendly, and I don't want to put anything bad on a player, but I just don't know that Jacobs repeats what he did last year.
Well, okay, so a few things regarding that. Number one, I think you're spot on, okay? I think Green Bay can still try to want to run the ball this year, but I think as good as Jacobs was, it's just natural for that there to be some sort of regression. I think he was punching above his weight last season. Now, to your point about Kraft and liking him this year at the tight end position, you don't have to really look much further than what else Green Bay has going on in their receiving core. You have Christian Watson, who people are probably getting sick of me saying this, but I don't believe he plays at all in 2025. I think he sits out the entire season, so he's off the radar. Romeo Doubs had a really bad concussion against the Eagles in the playoffs, wearing the Guardian cap. This was his second concussion already this season. And if you watched him go off the field, you have to wonder about his future too. That leaves Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks and not much else. Luke Musgrave is an athlete. I think he's almost inarguably more athletic than Tucker Kraft. However, Kraft is the better football player. He's 100% the better two-way tight end, which means he's going to be on the field more. I think you could see, as good as Kraft was last year, Scott, you could see Jordan Love leaning on him more this year and the Packers featuring him more in 2025, which makes me think that tight end 13, tight end 14 area, he could still pay off on that again this season.
Yes. Yeah, I believe so. Tucker Kraft, like I said, some of the guys above him, you don't know what happens with Ingram.
Yep.
He could be cut. He could be moved. Kelsey, does he retire? Andrews, does he regress? I
And
mean, you go up and down
might,
that list.
and Joku might have a new quarterback. Jonnu Smith, was he an aberration last year? I mean, the list goes on and on for sure.
Yeah, exactly. So would it shock me if Tucker Kraft was a top 5 tight end? It would not.
Right. I'm totally with you on that. I don't think he will be, but it would not shock me at all if he ends up. He was a top 5 tight end for a good portion of this season too. Past season. Let's stay in the division and talk about the Bears running back situation. I don't know, and I don't think I have anything on the rundown tonight specifically about Ben Johnson taking over in Chicago. I think we've talked about that on these shows enough over the last couple of weeks. But just in general, DeAndre Swift, I think nobody really has been chatting about and what his role is going to be on this offense. There's a possibility Chicago drafts somebody. They could sign somebody in free agency. But as of right now, Swift is the main guy in that backfield over Roschon Johnson. What do you think the Ben Johnson effect is going to be on Swift? How involved are you in DeAndre Swift so far this season? And before you answer that, I'll just tell you right now, running back 35 at the 9-10, this is significantly lower than where he was going last year.
Yeah, Swift is he's a tricky one. He's been that way since he was a rookie. Mm-hmm. It seems like ultra talented running back, and something gets in his way every year, and it's different every year. When he was with the Eagles, I thought he was just going to blow up. Then the Eagles decided they're not going to use him very much. But he did have a couple of games where he was amazing. But here's the thing with Swift, okay? He played on the Bears last year, who had one of the most atrocious offensive lines and bad offense, okay? And he somehow managed to be running back 20, okay? Which I think is amazing to do that on the Bears with that line, all right? He ended up being running back 20, okay? And the thing of it is now Ben Johnson comes over. You got to believe that the Bears offense is going to be better this year than it was last year. And everybody I've talked to feels the same way, that that's going to make improvements. Now, that would tell me he upgrades that offensive talent, he upgrades that offensive line, and Swift could be better than last year. And like you said, he's going at running back 35. If he was 20 last year, what if he moves up to 17 or something? Mm-hmm. That's really good value. I have one question that I don't have an answer to. Is Ben Johnson was in Detroit and Swift was traded to the Eagles.
Yeah, right.
I know they drafted Gibbs, but they signed Montgomery in the offseason way before they drafted Gibbs. So there was signs there that they weren't happy with the running back situation. Okay, that's what I was reading. And if Ben Johnson was the guy that wanted Swift gone, I don't know what that means for this year.
Yeah, that's true. That's a great point. You know, we were talking about, I can't remember who I was having this conversation with on one of my shows over the last couple of weeks. And he said, yeah, maybe this is why Johnson took the job, to reunite with DeAndre Swift, kind of tongue in cheek. But you bring up the opposite point, like, hey, this is a guy that was with the Lions when they parted ways with Swift. Maybe he doesn't get a whole lot of usage. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think it's worth bringing up too. In fact, there's a non-zero chance that the Bears invest in maybe Ashton Genty at 9. They could invest in a running back in the second round. This is a running back rich draft. And to that point, Corey Walters is chiming in on YouTube right now. Any chance Travion Henderson could be drafted as the second running back in the NFL draft? Well, Corey, not only do I think there's a chance, I think there's a fairly good chance. In the Never-Too-Early tournament right now, he's being drafted as running back 3 amongst rookies, right behind Omari and Hampton. And quite frankly, he's running back 24. Hampton's running back 22. He's right up there. I don't know, Scott, if you have any strong feelings on Travion Henderson. I just remember being excited about drafting this guy in dynasty leagues last year, and then he decided to go back to school, and now we get him finally in the draft this year. I'm kind of excited to see what he's going to do in the pros. I like Travion Henderson quite a bit. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I think he could smoke the combine, and he would elevate to the number 2 right away. So I do think that there's a chance for him to do that. He has the speed, the breakaway speed, and he showcases that at the combine. That's something some of the other guys don't have. And I think that could move him up behind Genty.
I think that what's interesting about Henderson is he could creep in to the back end of that first round. I think there's a non-zero chance about that. There's stuff we're going to hear about, whispers and rumors about this guy being a lock for the end of the first round, or he's going to slip to the second. But if he does slip to the second, there are teams that would look at drafting a running back there. You think about the Bears, who I already mentioned, the Las Vegas Raiders, who are looking for a running back as well. Maybe they take Travion Henderson in the second round. And speaking of the Raiders, they have an opening at wide receiver 1 on their team. I don't think they want to go into the season with Jakobi Meyers as their number 1 target at receiver. I think they could do that given that they have Brock Bowers, but I'd like to think that they add a little punch there. But maybe they don't. And I think this is one of the questions we have to answer as Never-Too-Early best ball drafters here, Scott. When you look at Jakobi Meyers and knowing he's probably not the answer as the number 1 receiver, but definitely could be the de facto number 1 receiver there this year, wide receiver 43 at the 809 right now. How do you handle him properly, knowing that the wheels could still be in motion with Pete Carroll, Tom Brady, and Chip Kelly in Las Vegas?
I say with Jakobi Meyers, bring anybody in that you want. It's not going to change Jakobi Meyers one bit. I say Jakobi Meyers is bulletproof. Okay? I'll give you examples here. And my son says, why do you draft this guy so much? And for years, I've been drafting him, okay? So he played in 2023, he played with Devontae Adams. Devontae Adams had 141 targets, okay? So he wasn't the one guy there. But you know what? He produced.
Yeah.
Last year, he played with Brock Bowers, 153 targets. Jakobi Meyers still produced. And you want to look at his quarterbacks for the last 4 years. He had a beat-up old Cam Newton, Brian Hoyer, Mac Jones, Bailey Zappa, Jimmy Garoppolo, Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, and Desmond Ridder. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
All right. These are like the worst quarterbacks that you could list. But you know what? The last 4 years, Jakobi Meyers finished 28th, 31st, 32nd, and 29th in fantasy receivers.
Always outperforming his ADP.
Always right around 30. So
Yeah.
he's a number 3 receiver in fantasy. That's what he is. And if you bring somebody in, I still think he's a number 3 receiver.
He is going behind Luther Burden, Jalen McMillan, Khalil Shakir, Jaden Reed right now. Smack dab towards the end of the 8th round, wide receiver 43 right now. I think I'm with you. I think you proved your point, and it makes perfect sense. Jakobi Meyers, whether it's a best ball, whether it's a managed league, getting Jakobi Meyers in the late 8th is probably going to pay off for you again this season. I'll tell you about a big payoff in 2024. Your son, who was on this show last week, Brad Thomas, winning the FFPC Never-Too-Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament last year. How close were you following that? Were you keeping tabs on it? Were you communicating with him towards the end of this as he was trying to secure that 5-figure grand prize?
Yeah, he had told me, I think after week 16, that he had 2 teams in week 17.
Mm-hmm.
That he had 2 that made it. I was blown away by that. Okay, I'm like, oh my, you got 2 teams. I can't get one to week 16. And so I said, and I said that's incredible. So I thought he's going to do well because 2 teams, he's going to get 2 prizes. I wasn't thinking about him winning it. I really wasn't at that time. And then he called me, I think the week 17, it was Sunday afternoon between the early and the late games.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'm in first place. And I said, you're kidding me. And I said, no, I'm in first place. And we talked then a little bit about what he needed to happen in order to win it. Like who was behind him, who they had, who he had. That's when he really started to look at it and get into it. And so I followed it from that point on with the remaining games. I rooted for him and was hoping that his guys did well, and they did. But what got him there, I think it was Baker Mayfield. I don't know, was in an early game or something, had like 5 touchdown passes. and it got him in the first place. So, and then he hung on and he stayed there and he maintained it. So it was really a last week thing that I was following, but it was pretty exciting.
I remember when he came on last week, and we were talking about like sort of like his march and when he started paying attention. And if I remember correctly, I do believe the Buccaneers played an early game that day at home against Carolina. And I think he said after he saw the Mayfield blow up for 5 touchdowns, I think his quote was like, "Oh, that's good." And then at that point, he's like, "Okay, now I got to take a look." Because I don't think he was like totally into like really following it hardcore. But when he saw that 5 touchdown game from Mayfield, he's like, now I have to look at this to see where I'm at. And congrats to him. First place and 6th place in the Superflex Never-Too-Early Best Ball Tournament last year, which was awesome for him. Fantastic stuff. And Scott, maybe it'll be your turn this year. You never know how these things go.
Maybe.
Let's go to some emails for you personally here that came in from some viewers. Will in Boca Raton, Florida. Hi, Scott. How much different will the Cowboys offense be next year from what it was this past season? Thank you, Will in Boca Raton, Florida. Yeah, this is interesting because you have a new head coach there, but it was the offensive coordinator last year in Brian Schottenheimer taking things over. You still have Dak Prescott, but he was hurt the majority of last season. So while the players and the stakeholders in this Cowboys team seem to be the same, we didn't see a ton of them last year, or maybe not at the forefront of the game where they're going to have much more of an impact on the 2025 season as what they did in 2024. How different is it going to be knowing that we don't know who their second receiver is and we really don't know who their starting running back is going to be?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions with that offense. I expect it to be much better than last year. I think the offense, if you look at Dak Prescott, he's had great years in every odd year and bad years in every even year. He had, I think it was an injury in 21, I believe it was, 20. I think it was 20. He got injured. Okay. That bad injury against the Giants. And it was early in the season. And then I think in 21, he came back with like massive numbers. And of course, he got hurt last year. But if you look at his career stats, it's like up and down and up and down. Okay. Even in odd years. I think Prescott can be a top 10 quarterback this year. And I think he was going at 18 or something. So he's very undervalued, in my opinion. Now, we got to see who their running back is and who their second receiver is. But I do believe they'll address both of those positions. But I expect, a healthy CeeDee Lamb back. I expect Dak Prescott back and Ferguson. And I think that, you're fine to draft Cowboys for fantasy. I think that offense will get clicking again, and I think Schottenheimer has something to prove. So I expect good results from fantasy points. Now, I don't know about the season, but I will say for the Cowboys, yes, I think the offense will get going again.
I think the continuity aspect cannot be underrated. Like, you have to understand that Prescott's still working with the same guy in Schottenheimer. He's still throwing to CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson is going to be back. I think that's another guy that's being underdrafted this year as well. One more email here. Billy in Chicago. What's the likelihood that Joe Mixon repeats what he did in 2024? Thanks, man. That is Billy in Chicago. Thank you for the email. Scott, when you look at Mixon this year, he is going off the board at in the Never-Too-Early Best Ball Tournament as running back 15 at the 407 right now, right behind Chase Brown and James Cook, right ahead of Chuba Hubbard, Kamara, and Kenneth Walker. What's the likelihood he comes back and repeats what he did this past season?
You mean be really good for part of the year and then totally fade?
Exactly. Yes, giving you those spike weeks, but maybe I guess I shouldn't say that. We don't know when his spike weeks are going to be. They could very well be at the end of this season. But knowing like what he did and at least limited action this year when his spike weeks were, is that what we should forecast again this season, or is it not going to be as good?
Yeah, I mean, they had offensive line problems, obviously, and I mean that impacted C.J. Stroud too. He looked great, like in September. Like it looked like this guy was going to be a top 5 running back. He won't be on any of my teams this year. I'm not a Joe Mixon guy. I feel like he teases you. He shows you some greatness, but he will let you down more often than not. And that's what I see. And I saw that at the end when he was with Cincinnati. He was doing the same thing. So he's been doing that for quite a few years. Like Joe Mixon has never really put together that full season where he was dominant, in recent years. So I don't expect him to do it this coming year either. So he's kind of a fade for me.
And you're talking about, too, a guy who has his best football behind him, too. So I think that kind of makes him easier to fade a little bit. It's not like this is Bijan Robinson or Breece. Breece Hall would be a good example, where Breece Hall was super inconsistent last year, but his best football probably in front of him, right? So Mixon I'm with you. I think he's an easy fade for me at this point. That is it for emails for now. We may get a chance, or we know we're running out of time. We might get a couple more emails here. But knowing that you are a Bengals guy, I want to get your take on the Cincinnati offseason right now, because there's a lot of stakeholders in this Bengals offense that we need to figure out what we're doing with in drafts this year. Speaking on Breakfast Ball this past week, Joe Burrow says he is willing to restructure his contract if it does indeed help retain the core skill position players for the Bengals. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, think about Trey Hendrickson on the defensive side, and I don't know if Mike Gesicki plays into this. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Higgins and Gesicki are hitting free agency this year, but obviously we already heard who's the de facto GM in Cincinnati, Scott? Is it Tobin? Is that his name? Am I screwing that up? I might be screwing that up.
I don't know.
I'm gonna get it right now because he was just Duke Tobin, right? Duke Tobin. I think that director of player personnel.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so basically, he's not officially the GM, but he's making a lot of the decision. He spoke to the media earlier this week. Not only did he say it was a very ringing, the opposite of a ringing endorsement for Jermaine Burton. Like, doesn't sound like this guy's going to be anything. But he also said the priority is Jamar Chase. And if the priority is Jamar Chase, it means that Higgins is secondary at best, right? And Trey Hendrickson and Gesicki and all these guys. Chase wins the Triple Crown last year. I'm not here to say, hey, should you take him in the first round or at the first overall pick? Yeah, totally. It makes perfect sense if you want to take him there. But how do we handle T. Higgins, knowing that there is a non-zero chance he might not be in Cincinnati? And quite frankly, if Higgins is not in Cincinnati, how much does that affect Joe Burrow, a player that I think people are excited about, but knowing that he does not offer the running capability that some of the other guys going around him, like Josh Allen, like Lamar Jackson, like Jaden Daniels do. And when you don't have that, and then you take away one of his top receivers, I think we have to start talking about, are we taking Burrow too high? So right now, in your draft, Scott, how are you handling Higgins? How are you handling Burrow? And looking into that Thomas crystal ball, what happens with these Bengals in this offseason?
Well, like you say, I know they really want to keep T. Higgins, but he wants top dollar. I don't think he's given a hometown discount. So I think that's an issue. I highly don't believe they re-signed Gesicki because they just can't do it. And Gesicki wants to get paid, okay? He has been clear about that he's taken minimal contracts for years. He says now he finally had a good year in Cincinnati. He wants to get paid for it finally. So I think he's going to cost a little more. They're going to fight to keep T. Higgins, okay, because they really do want him. Inevitably, I still see him leaving. I think somebody's just going to pay more. That's just the way the NFL typically works, okay? And somebody's going to pay up for T. Higgins. And you said, how will it affect Joe Burrow? It definitely will affect Joe Burrow, okay? They lost Tyler Boyd years ago. Have they really replaced that? When they had Chase and Higgins and Boyd, they had a perfect trio of complement players. And they lost Boyd, and you felt that a little bit, in the past years without him in the middle there. It wasn't quite as effective, all right? And now they lose Higgins. That's another big piece that's out of it. But I think if they lose Higgins, they will replace him with somebody. They're going to find a receiver that they bring in. And I'm not talking about a rookie. I'm talking about a veteran. But they'll go out and they'll bring somebody in to replace Higgins. They're not going to go from Chase and Higgins to just Chase and Burton. Okay, that's not going to happen.
Right.
They'll bring somebody in that's, I don't know, if it's a Stephon Diggs or it's an Amari Cooper, who knows? But they'll bring somebody in to try to fill that role somehow if they do lose Higgins.
So your advice to FFPC players would be, if you do believe Higgins is gone, Burton and Yoshivas would not be smart investments.
Yoshivas is kind of, because I think he's going to play in the slot more, okay? And, he was pretty effective in the slot. I've been drafting a lot of him late, okay? Because he's pretty much free. I have not taken Burton at all because I don't even know if Burton will be on the roster. Right. He's kind of buried himself a little bit in Cincinnati. So, but Yoshi, yeah, you can grab him late, and he's a great dart throw. Okay, I think he's at the very least a guy that's going to get you, a couple of good games a year and get you some points every week off the bench. And T. Higgins, I don't know what will happen with him. I have not been drafting him because he's gone very high, and you don't even know who his quarterback is.
Yep.
You don't know where he's going. He's had Joe Burrow, all right? And, you don't get much better than that, right? That's made him really good. Now let's say he goes somewhere like poor Jacoby Myers and he ends up with Aiden O'Connell as his quarterback. It's like T. Higgins ain't putting up them numbers anymore. So without knowing where he's gone, I like to take free agent guys that are going a little bit later in the draft. He's gone very early, so I think it's a huge risk with Higgins.
To your point, I'm just looking at the ADP right now for the Never-Too-Early tournament. And I think I said this at the top of the show. Higgins is wide receiver 15 at the 305. So if you want Higgins, you got to invest a mid-third round pick. And I'll also supplement that info with this. He is the first receiver on average drafted. I shouldn't say that. He is the first teammate of a receiver that's being drafted before him in the Never-Too-Early tournament. Chase obviously is the number one receiver overall. And then Higgins is wide receiver 15. You have to look down to Devonta Smith at wide receiver 24, DK Metcalf at wide receiver 25, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver 26, to find a teammate, a second receiver off the same team being drafted. Higgins is super high. And to me, that suggests that people are either believing Burrow is going to win the MVP next year and put up astronomical numbers. B, there is more of a level playing field where Higgins regresses to the mean in a positive way, Chase comes down in a negative way, and they get closer to the middle. Or C, number 3, whatever I was saying, he's on a different team as the number one receiver. But to your point, we don't know who that quarterback is, and quarterback matters quite a bit. I am, not to keep agreeing with you tonight, but I am also fading him at that 305 spot. I think I can do better and find somebody else. Maybe not a receiver there, but somebody else at a different position. 100% on board with that. I cannot believe how fast the hour has flown by. We are out of time, but I do want to ask you one final question, Scott. Super Sunday, Eagles chasing Chiefs chasing history. Eagles trying to disrupt the Chiefs from winning 3 consecutive Super Bowls, something we've never seen in our lifetime. Give me a final score. How's this game going to go?
This is the hardest Super Bowl to predict that I've ever seen. I've gone back and forth on this between these two teams, and they both have great defenses. They've got excellent teams. I think Philly's got one of the best rosters in the NFL. They've done such a good job of putting this roster together. But they do have a lot of rookies and young players on it. Okay. It's still a fairly young team. The Chiefs are a team that I watched a lot as well this year. And there were so many games I thought they should have lost. and they pulled them out somehow. Just magic at the end. They find a way, and they're so experienced with all their AFC games and their Super Bowl. I'm just going to say right now, I think the Chiefs three-peat. I think they get it done. It's going to be by a whisker, and it might take them scoring over 30 points for like the first time, maybe it's like maybe 31-23, something like that, 31-27. I think it's going to come down to whether the Chiefs can stop Barkley. And, I believe that they'll scheme that defense, okay, to try to take Barkley away and make Hurts beat them. And it's not that Hurts can't beat them, but I think that it reduces the Eagles' chances at that point. So I think it's going to be a great Super Bowl. But I would not want to put money on it. Let's put it that way. It's a coin flip as to who wins this one.
I'm seeing it the same way as you. And if the Chiefs are able, they're not going to take away Barkley. But if they do slow him down, I think that presents a lot of problems for the Eagles where Jalen Hurts would have to go out and win the game. I was listening to the Fantasy Points podcast with John Hansen and Brian Drake the other day. I didn't even realize that Hurts didn't throw to the middle of the field at all against Washington. And he's going to have to do that. Steve Spagnuolo is a super intelligent defensive coordinator. He's going to be able to exploit that. And if you take Barkley away where you keep him under, 80, even 70 yards, something like that, I don't know if the Eagles can win. I'm with you. I'm taking the Chiefs. I'm saying 25-22. Kind of a weird score, but oftentimes these things end in weird scores. And I think the Chiefs complete the three-peat. In any event, I'll be watching it that day after I draft in the KFFSC. You have been drafting a ton in the FFPC, Scott. You already have 5 titles to your name in the FFPC, and maybe this is the year you cash the big one. Certainly having your son take down the Never-Too-Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament last year is motivation enough where you are chasing that, which is great. Certainly great stuff from you tonight. A lot of fantastic insight that I know I'll be applying to my drafts. I wish you nothing but the best of luck going forward in all of your FFPC drafts, and for sure, enjoy the Super Bowl on Sunday. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight.
All right. Thank you very much.
That is Scott Thomas, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely. Thank you. Be good. We'll see you. Scott Thomas, the 5-time champ of the FFPC, joining me on the show tonight, pinch hitting for one Ferrell Elliott, and he did a bang-up job. Thank you so much, Scott. I want to thank him, Ferrell Elliott. I want to thank the FFPC, Rob Bryson, and of course, each and every one of you for hanging out with me, streaming, downloading, listening, watching, whatever you're doing. I appreciate it. We will be back. No show next Friday. We'll be doing a show on Wednesday, 10 p.m. Eastern time. Ferrell Elliott will be back for that Super Bowl recap. Looking forward to not only Dynasty Leagues, but the Never-Too-Early Best Ball Tournament as well. In case you missed it, we kicked off Season 10 of the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown this past Tuesday with 9th and 10th place finisher in the FFPC Never-Too-Early Best Ball Tournament last year. Paul Van Oostveen joined me. He's been drafting a lot in the NTE this year. A lot of great insight into how he's handling players in that tournament this year. We will be back on that show Tuesday, March 4th will be the next episode there. In case you missed it, Thursday night's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network, we had on Ryan Reynolds from Player Profiler, Established the Run, and Sports Illustrated. Chopped it up with a lot of prop betting in that for the Super Bowl, as well as his thoughts on players, rookies and veterans alike, going forward and how he's handling them in his draft so far this year. I want to remind you that next Thursday we will be back with the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Fantasy Alarm's Colby Conway, who will be my guest for the full 2 hours. That kicks off at 7 o'clock next Thursday night. Play the Never-Too-Early Best Ball tournaments right now with the FFPC at myffpc.com. Enter for $125 and win up to a $40,000 grand prize in the Never-Too-Early tournament. The Superflex tournament only costs you $35 to get in, and you could still win a $10,000 grand prize. Those tournaments are going on right now. They will run through April 24th, the night of the NFL draft start. 30-second, 60-second, 2-hour, and 6-hour clocks going on right now for that. Pick up some dynasty teams right now at myffpc.com. Those entry fees normally range from $77 up to $5,000. You're going to notice a lot of those teams have been discounted for 2025, so take advantage of that and play fantasy football 365 days a year. In 15 plus years of dynasty fantasy football with the FFPC, we've held and we still continue to hold more than 1,800 leagues. Not a single one has ever folded. So when you join a league, you know that you have the security of being able to play that every year going forward. And of course, the big launch that we have had, the Big Gorilla Tournament going on right now. $1 million grand prize, $350 entry fee. Draft's already off and running now. In case you saw my FFPC mailer I sent out today, I included a draft board from the first ever Big Gorilla draft that got completed Sunday night, so you can take a look at that. Drafts ongoing right now, both live and slow. The early Rampage is going on right now. Great thing about this is you can enter for $350, and it's basically one entry fee for 2 tournaments. You'll get into the early Rampage tournament. You'll also get into the actual Big Gorilla tournament for $1 million grand prize. Early Rampage is paying a $10,000 grand prize. 7 Bananas promo is also going on right now. Go to myffpc.com/Big Gorilla to enter and for more information on that tournament. Remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment on the video, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and get notified each and every time we go live, which will be next Thursday at 7 o'clock with Fantasy Lambs, Colby Conway, and myself. Thanks so much for watching. For Scott Thomas, I'm Eric Balkman. This has been the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour on the FFPC Network. Your Super Bowl weekend officially starts now.
This has been another episode of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour presented by myffpc.com. It was broadcast live and was watched around the world. Balky and Farrell will be back next week with more analysis, more interviews, and more advice from guests much smarter than they are. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk with you again next week.
One other update I should mention, I know I talked to you guys about this last week, an update on the audio feed. I do have a new feed for it. The RSS has been updating at several networks, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So those are the big networks I think that we get the most downloads and streams from. So if you are subscribed there, you should be getting these new episodes going forward. We're connected to probably, I want to say, about 36 different podcast networks. And I'm in the process of making sure that we get these episodes pushed out to those networks as well. But I can tell you, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you are good to go if you like listening to this Saturday mornings or Sunday mornings, perhaps, before you're setting lineups. We do this show year-round, and you're going to get this show year-round for sure at all those networks. I appreciate your patience. Enjoy the game on Sunday. I know I will, and I will see you in the draft rooms going forward.